look back now, it's strange how a single moment can crack open a life. I used to believe in the way family holds you together, like old beams in a house you never doubt until the wood splinters under your weight. My name is Maren Elwood, and if you'd told me 5 years ago that my own parents would choose my brother's half-baked dream over my life, I would have laughed you off the porch. But here I am, alive, thriving, and ready to tell you exactly how that betrayal turned me into someone they never saw coming. It all began with the phone call that should have ended in relief. I was 25, just a few months out of grad school, finally landing a decent job that offered health insurance. The dizziness I'd been brushing off as exhaustion had become a constant haze that made the edges of my vision bleed black when I stood too fast. But you know how it is, you're young, you think your body is unbreakable until it's not. The doctor's voice was soft, apologetic. He said words like lymphoma and aggressive, and I clutched the edge of my kitchen counter like it was a life raft. I called my mom before I even let the tears come. I still remember the exact light in the room. Weak winter sun streaming through dirty blinds. When she answered, her voice clipped and distracted. My brother Caleb had just pitched some big idea at a local startup incubator. He'd dropped out of college for it, convinced he'd be the next Silicon Valley golden boy. They were all gathered around him like he was royalty waiting to be crowned. I told her what the doctor said. There was a pause. A long one. Then the tone of her voice changed, like she'd switched from mother to business partner. How much will the treatment cost, Maren? No. Are you okay, or do you want me to come over? When I said the number the specialist had given me, half a year's salary, minimum, she sucked in her breath through her teeth. It's just that your father and I have already invested so much in Caleb's seed funding, she said. We can't pull that out now. You understand, don't you? This is his chance. His chance. Not mine. I slept on a friend's couch that night. I couldn't stand to be in my apartment alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my own family would just watch me wither away. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Caleb, an awkward, stumbling apology with a GoFundMe link. Maybe your friends can help, he wrote. Like my life was a charity cause to be passed around Facebook, I could have curled up and let the cancer chew through me while my parents fed Caleb's dream. But something hardened inside me instead. The same week my hair started falling out in clumps, I started working double shifts at the small marketing firm that had just taken me on. I sold my car for cash, took the bus in the middle of winter, wrapped in a thrift store coat that smelled like mothballs. I learned what pain tolerance really means when you have to keep breathing through it because you can't afford not to. Some nights, I'd lie awake, staring at the pale green walls of the infusion center, thinking about Caleb in his shiny co-working space, calling himself a founder on LinkedIn, while I scribbled pitch decks for clients I didn't even like. My parents never called to ask how the treatments were going. But once, my mother emailed me a link to Caleb's startup launch party. We wish you could come, she wrote. Maybe when you're feeling better. I didn't reply. What could I say? That I wish they'd sold the stupid idea and kept their daughter instead? But life is strange, and sometimes it saves you in ways you don't expect. The CEO of the firm where I worked, Linda Serrano, saw something in me, a spark, she called it. She'd find me half asleep at my desk, scarf wrapped around my bald head, tapping out client proposals like my life depended on it. Which, in a way, it did. I've never seen anyone push through like you, she said one night, sliding a mug of chamomile tea across my desk. When you're done fighting this thing, I want you on my leadership team. It was the first time I let myself believe that maybe I could make it to the other side. 3 years later, I did. I was declared in remission on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I walked out of that hospital, shivering in the drizzle, clutching the discharge papers like a golden ticket. I knew I'd lost so much. My savings, my hair, even my old naive trust in people who share your DNA. But I'd gained something too. An edge, a hunger, a promise to myself that I'd never again let anyone decide what my life was worth. Linda kept her word. She promoted me, then partnered with me. I built out a division that no one thought would fly. It exploded. Our client list tripled in a year. And when Linda retired early to sail the world, she left the company to me. Just like that, I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar consulting firm before I turned 30. I didn't think much about Caleb during that time. He was a shadow in the back of my mind, a ghost of betrayal that occasionally rattled his chains but didn't scare me anymore. But life is funny. It loops back on itself when you least expect it. One morning, I was scanning potential acquisitions. Small startups we could absorb to expand our tech branch, when a name popped up on my screen that made my stomach drop. It was Caleb's company. Their funding had dried up. Their so-called revolutionary app had flopped, and they were desperate for a buyout to cover mounting debts. And guess who was in the perfect position to scoop it up for pennies on the dollar? Me. I stared at the numbers on the screen, the corners of my mouth curling into a smile that felt dangerous. My parents had bet my life against his future. Now I held that future in the palm of my hand. I leaned back in my leather chair, the city skyline a glittering promise behind me. For the first time in years, I felt a warmth bloom in my chest. Not forgiveness, no, but a sense of balance, like the universe had finally handed me the scales. The email was ready to send. Just one click, and Caleb's kingdom would belong to the sister he'd watched crawl through hell alone. But that's where this gets interesting. Because power is never just about money. And revenge? Well, it's never as simple as a signature. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. I didn't send the email right away. I sat there, fingers hovering over the trackpad, my eyes drifting over the glassy skyline, like the buildings might whisper an answer back to me. Should I do it? Should I crush Caleb's last chance the way he and our parents had crushed mine? There was a version of me, maybe the old Marin, the soft-hearted girl who still thought family meant something unshakable, that might have closed the laptop and walked away. But that girl was gone. She died in a hospital bed, under the harsh blue lights, replaced by someone who knew exactly what the world could take from you if you let it. Still, I didn't click send that night. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and pulled up the financials. Their numbers were a mess. Unpaid invoices, a ballooning line of credit, disgruntled angel investors who'd lost patience years ago. Their so-called brilliant idea was just another paper airplane thrown into a hurricane. I almost laughed when I saw how much they'd begged for bridge funding, including emails to our parents. They'd given him more. Of course they had. I called my lawyer the next morning, my voice calm as granite. Draft the acquisition paperwork, I said. But hold it for now. I want to see him squirm a little longer. And squirm he did. A week later, Caleb showed up in my lobby unannounced. My assistant knocked on my office door, her eyebrows raised like she'd seen a ghost. "There's a man here," she said, almost whispering. "He says he's your brother." The word didn't even taste real on my tongue anymore. "Send him in." He walked in like he owned the place, but his shoulders were hunched under a suit that looked more expensive than he could afford. He hadn't shaved in a few days, and the faint circles under his eyes gave him away. He was unraveling and he knew it. "Marin," he said, his voice too bright, too forced. "It's been forever. Look at this place. CEO, huh? I always knew you'd do big things." I didn't stand up. I let him stand there while I steepled my fingers and watched him sweat. "What do you want, Caleb?" He blinked. The mask slipped for a second, and I saw the panic underneath. "Look, I know things have been tense, but family sticks together, right? I mean, you're doing so well now. We could really use your help. Just a little buyout to keep the lights on. Once we pivot, we'll pay you back triple." I laughed. Short, sharp, bitter. Triple? Caleb, your burn rate alone is a dumpster fire. You've got lawsuits pending. Unpaid contractors. You think I didn't do my homework? His face went red. "I'm trying here, okay? I'm not asking for a handout. It's business. We both win." I stood and walked around the desk, close enough to see the beads of sweat forming at his hairline. You know what's funny? 3 years ago, when I asked Mom and Dad for help, they said the same thing. It's business. Caleb needs this. It's his big chance. Do you remember what you said to me? His jaw tightened. "Marin, come on." You said, "Try not to be a burden." That's what you told me when I was counting out my chemo pills on a card table in a moldy basement. So forgive me if I'm not feeling charitable. He opened his mouth like he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped. He looked smaller somehow, like a kid who'd lost his way home. "Please," he whispered. "They'll lose everything. Mom and Dad mortgaged the house for my last funding round." Of course they did. Even after everything, they'd bet the roof over their heads on their golden boy's dreams. And why wouldn't they? He'd always been the center of their universe. I'd been an orbiting planet. Useful, bright when they needed me to shine, but easy to forget when they looked toward his son. I could have told him no then and there, watched him walk out of my office and into bankruptcy court. But something in me hesitated. Not pity, never that, but curiosity. How far would he bend before he broke? So I leaned in, my voice soft as silk. "I'll consider it," I said, "but on my terms." His head snapped up, hope lighting in his eyes. "Anything." I smiled. Good. I'll be in touch. When he left, I called Linda. She still answered my calls from whatever tropical island she was anchored at that week. You're playing with fire, she said after I laid it out. Be careful, Marin. Revenge has a way of burning you too. I'm not after revenge, I lied. I'm after what's mine. Over the next few weeks, I invited Caleb back again and again. Each time, I raised the stakes. I made him pitch his failing company to my board, watching him stutter through slides he'd clearly thrown together at 3 a.m. I asked for documents I knew he'd forged, just to see him sweat. My executives looked at me like I was some corporate shark, but they didn't know the half of it. They didn't know how many nights I'd lain awake picturing my parents' faces if they ever realized their miracle boy was a fraud. One night after a particularly brutal meeting, Caleb lingered at the door of my office. Why are you doing this? He asked. Do you hate me that much? I wanted to tell him the truth. That hate wasn't the right word. Hate burns fast. What I felt was colder, deeper. It was survival sharpened into a blade. You were my brother, I said instead, and you let me die alone. He flinched, and for a second, I almost saw the boy he'd been, the one who used to push me on the swing set, who once sat with me under a blanket fort during a thunderstorm and promised he'd always protect me. But that boy was gone too. We'd both killed our ghosts. When the deal was finally ready, I invited my parents to my office. They showed up, arm in arm, all smiles and brittle warmth. Marin! It's been too long, my mother gushed, her eyes sweeping over the gleaming floors and the tasteful art on the walls. I could almost see her calculating what it was all worth. I poured them tea, the good kind I saved for clients. I assume Caleb told you what's happening, I said. My father cleared his throat. We're so proud of what you've built here, and we know you'll do what's best for the family. Family. That word again thrown at me like a net they thought could pull me back into the fold. I sipped my tea and let the silence stretch until my mother's fingers started tapping nervously on her cup. Here's how it will work, I said finally. I'm buying Caleb's company for 1/10 of its valuation. You'll sign over the mortgage rights to me as collateral. If I decide to keep the house, you'll have 30 days to vacate. My mother's mouth fell open. But, Marin, we raised you, I set my cup down, the clink loud in the stunned quiet. No, you raised him. I raised myself. My father's face flushed purple. You're punishing us. No, I said. I'm collecting what I'm owed. Caleb looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I didn't know I cut him off with a look. You knew exactly who I was when you came crawling back. They left my office in a hush of angry footsteps, the echo of their disappointment bouncing off the marble floors. And me? I watched them go, feeling nothing but a slow, steady satisfaction. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city lights, the signed papers heavy in my hand. I'd done it. I'd bought his dreams for pocket change, taken back the roof they'd mortgaged for him. It should have felt like victory. But something twisted in my gut as I realized this was just the beginning. I'd won the battle. The war was still waiting. And I was ready. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. When dawn cracked over the skyline the next morning, I didn't sleep a wink. The contract was done, the signatures dried like old blood on white paper, and yet sleep stayed just out of reach, like it was mocking me. I kept replaying the way my mother's eyes had turned glassy, the way my father's lips had pressed into that thin, disapproving line. Even Caleb's slumped shoulders haunted me, but this time the ghosts didn't make me flinch. They reminded me of the promise I made to myself in that stale hospital room. I'd never again beg for anyone's mercy. I poured black coffee into a chipped mug, one of the few things I'd kept from my first apartment. A reminder of the nights when I'd crawl in from the late shift, my veins burning with chemo and ambition. I sipped it slowly, watching the city wake up beneath my balcony. People with umbrellas fought through a cold drizzle. Neon signs flickered to life in corner bodegas. And I thought about all the mornings I'd stood here, imagining what it would feel like to be free of them. But freedom's a funny thing. It doesn't feel like wings. It feels like armor, heavy, clinking, cold against your skin. I didn't feel light. I felt ready. Caleb tried to reach me the next day. He called, texted, left voicemails that swung between weeping apologies and sputtering rage. He knocked on the glass doors of my building at midnight until my security team escorted him away, his voice echoing off the marble lobby like a song I couldn't get out of my head. I ignored him. I threw myself into the work that had saved me. I met with new clients who'd never know the ragged girl with a scarf tied around her head. I wore my sharpest suits, pulled my hair, now long, dark, and defiant, into a tight twist at the base of my neck. I closed deals that made other CEOs sweat bullets. I was a woman who didn't flinch when the world turned cruel. Until I got the letter. It came in a plain white envelope, slipped under my office door by someone who knew how to bypass reception. No return address, no stamp. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, the words typed in bold black. You think you won. But we aren't done with you. There was no signature. No threat spelled out. But the cold that crept up my spine was more potent than any gun pressed to my temple. I looked out through the glass walls of my office at the people bustling around on my floor. My people, my family, in the only sense that word still meant anything. And I knew, right then, they'd made a mistake. Whoever we was, they thought fear would make me bend. They didn't know me at all. That night, I sat in my living room with a legal pad across my knees, scribbling out every possible scenario. Was it Caleb, trying to scare me into undoing the deal? Our parents, lashing out from the shadows now that their golden boy had turned to dust in their hands? Or someone else, one of the angry creditors now pointing fingers at me for buying what was left of the carcass? I had no illusions about the mess I'd inherited. Caleb's company was a money pit. I hadn't bought it for profit. I'd bought it for control. My control. But some debts have long shadows. A knock at my door startled me out of my spiral. I glanced at the clock. 2 a.m. No one sane comes calling at 2 a.m. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept tucked behind the umbrella stand. Old habits die hard when you've spent years walking home alone through neighborhoods that turn their backs at dusk. I opened the door just a crack, and there he was, Caleb. Soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead, eyes bloodshot and wide. "Marin, please," he rasped. "Let me in." I should have slammed the door in his face. I should have called security. But some reckless part of me wanted answers, so I stepped aside. He stood in my hallway, dripping water onto the polished floors. "Did you get the letter?" he asked. No preamble, no apology. "You mean the one threatening me?" I crossed my arms. "Cute trick." He shook his head, spraying droplets like a wet dog. "It wasn't me. It's them, the people I borrowed from. The ones Dad found for me when the banks laughed me out of the room." My breath caught. "What people?" He looked down at his ruined shoes, shame crawling across his face. "Private lenders. You know, the kind that don't care about your credit score as long as you sign away your soul." I swore under my breath. "How much do you owe?" "Enough," he said. "Enough that if they don't get their money, they'll come for whoever they think can pay." I wanted to throw the bat at him. Instead, I turned away, pinching the bridge of my nose. "And you think that's me?" "They do now," he said. "You bought my debt when you took the company." I laughed. A raw, humorless bark that echoed off the hallway walls. "Of course I did." Caleb stepped forward, his voice dropping. "I don't care what you think of me. But they're dangerous, Marin. They don't play by rules. You can't just lawyer up and make them disappear." I met his eyes that looked so much like mine once. "Get out. Marin. Out." My voice cracked like a whip. He flinched, then stumbled back out into the rain, shoulders hunched like he was bracing for a blow. I slammed the door and locked it, leaning against the wood until my pulse slowed. I wanted to believe he was bluffing. But deep down, I knew Caleb had always been a coward, not a liar. If he was scared, it meant I should be too. The next morning, I doubled my security detail. Hired a private investigator. Scrubbed every inch of my financials. But the letters kept coming. Slipped under my door, into my car, once taped to the inside of my apartment elevator. Always the same bold, taunting words. "We aren't done with you." One night, after a gala where I'd pretended to be just another successful CEO sipping champagne and posing for photos, I came home to find my front door ajar. My breath froze in my throat. I pushed it open with the tip of my heel, my mind racing through every worst-case scenario. Inside, nothing looked touched, except my office. My laptop was gone. My files dumped across the floor like a storm had ripped through. On my desk, written in permanent marker, were the words, "You pay what he owes." I sat down in the mess, my fingers trembling against the paper. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to that old fear, the one that made me feel so small, so alone, when my body was betraying me and my family turned their backs. But fear is a teacher, and I was done being its student. I called my lawyer. I called my head of security. I called the board. I told them everything. No more secrets. If they were coming for me, I'd be ready. Somewhere in the mess, a photo slipped out. A picture of me and Caleb when we were kids, sitting under that blanket fort during the storm. For a heartbeat, I let myself mourn that girl. The one who thought love could save you from anything. I burned that picture in the sink. This was my war now. And I wouldn't lose. After that night, sleep wasn't an option. I'd lie in bed, every creak of the pipes or hum of the city making my skin prickle. I told myself it was just the exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. But fear has a way of sharpening the senses you wish would dull. The next day, I sat in the boardroom at dawn. My most trusted executives sat with me, looking half-dressed, their coffee cups steaming on the polished table. They built this company with me brick by brick, many of them from the early days when Linda still ran things. They'd earned my trust when no one else could. "We're not just fighting a hostile takeover," I told them. "We're fighting a threat that doesn't follow the law." I slid the photos across the table. The vandalized door, the threat scrawled in my own office, the burnt edges of the last letter I'd torched in my sink. A hush fell. Even Raj, my fiercest numbers guy, went pale. "Do you want us to call the cops?" he asked. I almost laughed. The cops can't protect us from people who don't leave fingerprints. No, we need to do what we've always done. Work smarter, stay steps ahead. We mapped out everything. My legal counsel cross-checked every contract Caleb had signed, looking for hidden clause that might drag us under. Raj's team dug into the financials again, searching for off-the-books transactions. Jody, my security lead, started rotating bodyguards at my apartment and my office. They parked outside my door at night, engines idling in the dark. But paranoia has a cost. One night, I looked out my window to see one of Jody's guys pacing by the curb, his face half lit by the street lamp. Just for a second, I wondered, what if he's the threat? What if the enemy is already inside? The thought made my stomach twist. I reminded myself, trust no one completely, not anymore. Meanwhile, Caleb vanished. No calls, no texts, not a single knock at my door. For a few days, I thought maybe he'd skipped town, run off with what little dignity he had left. But late one night, I found him, though not in any way I expected. I was coming back from a meeting with one of our international partners, my mind numb from spreadsheets and whispered boardroom worries, when I spotted a figure huddled by the side of the alley behind my building. I almost walked past, but something in the shape of his shoulders made me stop. "Caleb?" I whispered. He looked up, face half hidden in the shadows. His eyes were hollow, his cheeks hollowed out from days without sleep or food. I realized, with a start, that he'd been living like this. Hiding. "They're everywhere," he croaked. "They want me to sign everything over. They say they'll leave you alone if I do." My throat closed up. "Sign what over? Caleb, what did you promise them?" "Collateral," he murmured. "The patents, the rights. Your company now owns it, but they say it's still theirs. They don't care about the paperwork. They want their money back." He grabbed my wrist, his fingers cold and trembling. "You have to protect Mom and Dad. They don't know who these people are. If they come to the house." I yanked my hand away. "You should have thought of that before you dragged us all into this." His eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know, Marin. I swear. They seemed legit. They're loan sharks, Caleb. They always seem legit until they show you their teeth." He sank down onto the wet concrete, hugging his knees like a child. For a moment, I saw the boy under the man again, lost, desperate, and so small. But sympathy is a luxury I'd buried years ago. "Get up," I said, my voice iron. "You're coming with me." I didn't give him a choice. I dragged him upstairs, put him in the guest room, and locked the door from the outside, like he was a ghost I didn't trust to stay put. I could hear him crying through the wall that night. I turned up the TV to drown it out. By morning, he was gone. The lock picked, the bed cold. He'd taken nothing but a hoodie from my closet and the cash from my wallet. For a moment, I stood at the threshold of that empty room, rage curling like smoke in my lungs. I knew what I had to do. I went to the house they'd mortgaged for him. The same one that used to be my home, before they made it clear I was worth less than his dreams. When my parents opened the door, they looked older, frayed around the edges in a way that told me the nights had been sleepless for them too. "Marin," my mother said, voice brittle. "Is he with you?" "No," I said. "He's running, and he's made you the bait." They didn't understand at first. I laid it out for them in plain language. No sugarcoating, no gentle touches. Every dollar they'd given him had strings attached, and now those strings were nooses tightening around all our necks. They looked at me like they were seeing me for the first time. Maybe they were... "What do we do?" my father asked, voice hoarse. "You pack a bag," I said. "You leave tonight. I'll handle the rest." My mother reached for my hand the same way she did when I was sick, before the first betrayal. I let her fingers touch mine, but I didn't squeeze back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, I moved them into a hotel under a fake name. I put 2 of Jody's best men at the door. I hired another investigator. This one ex-military. Someone who didn't flinch when I told him we might be dealing with people who'd rather see us in the ground than in court. Days blurred into nights. I slept in my office, if at all. Caleb was still a ghost, floating through my security camera footage like an echo. I didn't know if he was running from them or from himself. Maybe both. One morning, I found an envelope on my desk. Inside was a USB drive. No note. I plugged it into the secure machine, ignoring the knots in my gut. A single video file popped up. Grainy, shaky footage of Caleb, hands bound behind his back, bruises blooming along his cheekbone. "Marin," he rasped through swollen lips. "They say you have 1 week. 1 week to pay, or you'll never find me again." I slammed my fist into the desk so hard the wood splintered. My phone buzzed before I could process the rage. A text, no number attached. 1 week. "OR he bleeds for you." I thought about deleting the file, wiping the drive clean, pretending I hadn't seen it. But that old promise whispered again. Never beg for mercy. This wasn't about mercy anymore. This was about ending what should have been buried with that first lie, that first no when they chose him over me. I called Jody. Called Raj. Called my lawyer. "Circle the wagons," I said. "No more fear. It's our move now." And somewhere, under all the anger and exhaustion and betrayal, I felt something dangerous spark to life. I was done surviving. I was ready to hunt. I didn't sleep the night I saw that video. How could I? The images burned behind my eyes like a film reel stuck on repeat. Caleb, tied to that chair, the flicker of fear in his eyes that I hadn't seen since we were kids. The threat. So simple, so chilling. 1 week. In the morning, I traded my silk blouse and pencil skirt for black jeans, a leather jacket, and boots sturdy enough to run in if it came to that. The Marin my boardroom knew would have looked alien in the mirror. Hair in a tight braid, no jewelry, just a hard glint in her eyes. But this was the real me, the version I'd hidden under tailored suits and expensive perfume. The girl who'd learned how to survive when life turned to ash around her. Jody met me at the office before sunrise, her boots echoing on the marble floor. She handed me a mug of strong coffee and a small, heavy object. A burner phone. "Untraceable," she said. "Use this for anything related to the drop." I sipped the coffee, staring at the security monitors behind her. Any word on who they are? Names? Faces? She shook her head, grim. "They're ghosts, off the grid. But they're sloppy. They left footprints in the dark web. My guy's running down leads, but it's like chasing shadows in a storm." I nodded. "Then we draw them out." Raj came in next, his tie askew, eyes bloodshot from another night combing through Caleb's buried secrets. He dropped a stack of files on the table so thick the corner nearly cracked the wood. "You won't like this," he said. "Try me." "Caleb used some of the startup's IP as collateral twice over," Raj said. "Technically, you're on the hook for every cent they claim. But," he pointed to a single sheet tucked in the middle, "if we can prove the documents were forged, we can void the debt in court." "How long?" 6 months minimum." I laughed, short and sharp. "We've got 6 days." Raj flinched. "Marin, Keep working, I cut in. Find me something, anything I can use as leverage. I spent the next 24 hours pinging between calls, meetings, whispered strategy sessions in the glass-walled conference room where my executives sat hunched like war generals. But at night, when the office lights dimmed, I'd stand at the window and watch the city breathe, millions of lights flickering like the synapses of a brain too big to comprehend. Somewhere out there, Caleb was tied to a chair in a room I couldn't find. And my parents, still hiding in that motel under assumed names, were as powerless as I'd once been. No more. On the third day, Jody's investigator finally brought me a name. Roman Tavella, he said, sliding a blurry photo across the table. A face I didn't recognize, but the deadness in his eyes made my stomach turn. Runs a shell company that funnels cash through fake charities. Real estate, crypto, you name it. He's the one who bankrolled Caleb's last desperate round. Where is he now? Off the radar, Jody said. But he has a place in the old meatpacking district. Guards, cameras, the works. I didn't hesitate. Set up a meeting. Raj looked like he might be sick. You can't just walk in there. Watch me. We chose midnight. The air was damp with the threat of rain when Jody and I pulled up in an unmarked SUV. The building loomed over the street like a rotting tooth. Graffiti curling up the brick. Steel doors scarred from decades of secrets. Jody pressed a pistol into my hand. Just in case. I almost laughed. I've been shot at before. Not by men who don't care if they leave a body, she said. Promise me you'll aim for the knees first. Inside, the hallway smelled of rust and wet concrete. 2 men frisked me at the door, their faces blank as marble. They didn't bother with small talk as they led me to an office that looked ripped from another era. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, a faded Persian rug soaked with old secrets. Roman Tavella sat behind the desk, his suit sharp but cheap, in a way that told me he liked to pretend he was important. He didn't stand when I walked in. Ms. Elwood, he drawled, his accent slick and hard to place. To what do I owe the pleasure? You know why I'm here, I said. You have something that belongs to me. He leaned back, a shark's grin splitting his face. Your brother? Cute kid? Terrible liar. Let him go, I said. I'll pay what he owes. Roman chuckled. It's not that simple. He signed his life over twice. You want to settle his tab? Fine. But your name's on the paperwork now. And I'm a businessman. I like collateral that breathes. My skin went cold. You want me. For a while, he said. I guarantee that you'll keep the money coming. No sudden disappearances. No. The words sliced the air between us like a blade. You get your money. That's it. Roman spread his hands, mock innocence dripping from every syllable. Then we have nothing more to discuss. He snapped his fingers. One of his men stepped forward, a gloved hand gripping my arm. But Jody's training didn't fail me. I twisted, elbow to ribs, heel to knee. The guard dropped, gasping. Roman's eyes widened just enough for me to see the fear flicker. This isn't over, I said, voice calm as a tomb. You want a war? Fine. But remember, I already survived one. I walked out, boots echoing in the filthy hallway, my heartbeat thundering like war drums in my chest. Back in the SUV, Jody just stared at me. You're out of your mind, she said, but there was something like respect in her voice. He wants me scared, I said. He thinks I'm still that girl who begged for help. He's about to learn the difference. By dawn, I'd wired what I could scrape together, more than half of what we'd kept liquid for emergencies. It wouldn't buy Caleb's freedom, but it'd buy me time. Time to flip the board. On the 6th day, they made their move. My phone buzzed at 3 a.m. No caller ID. I answered on the second ring. One last chance, Roman said, his voice smooth as oil. Bring the rest tonight. Or say goodbye. I stared out my window at the city that had given me everything. My strength, my pain, my new name. You'll get your money, I said, but not on your terms. Then we'll do it our way, he said. The line went dead. Jody burst in before I could move. They hit the hotel. Your parents are gone. The words knocked the breath out of me. For a second, the edges of my vision went white. Then I snapped back. Where's the feed? She pulled it up on her tablet. Grainy footage of 2 masked men ushering my parents into a van at the side entrance. No struggle, no noise. just like they'd disappeared into the night. "You're still protected," Jody said. "They want you alive." "They want to break me," I corrected. "And they think this will do it." I stood there, every muscle in my body trembling, not with fear, but with something colder. I could hear Linda's voice in my head, that night when she handed me the company keys. "Power is the promise you make to yourself. Never break it." I turned to Jody. "Get Raj. Get everyone. We end this tonight." I didn't know how we'd do it, but I knew one thing. This was no longer about money. This was about who I'd become the day my own family chose my brother's dreams over my blood. That night, as the storm broke over the city, I gathered my team in the boardroom, our war room now. Rain lashed the windows like the world was trying to wash itself clean. "It wouldn't." "They think they have me cornered," I said. "They think I'll trade everything to keep them safe. But here's the truth. They're only safe if I win." Faces turned toward me. My people, my real family now. The ones who'd stayed when it cost them sleep, marriages, sanity. The ones who'd bled with me. "Tonight, we take back what's ours," I said. "No more fear, no more waiting." Outside, lightning cracked the sky in two. And somewhere in the dark, I knew Roman Tavella was smiling. Let him smile. I'd learned to live with storms. By the time dawn cracked open again, our so-called war room felt more like a bunker. We'd pushed the conference table aside and taped maps to the walls. Blueprints of the meatpacking district, old city schematics, and blurry satellite images that looked like they'd been ripped straight from some covert operation. Jody's team was running shifts around the clock. I'd seen the inside of my penthouse maybe twice that week. And even then, I kept one eye on the street below, watching for headlights that shouldn't be there. Sleep was the currency I spent, like pocket change. When my body finally forced me to shut my eyes, I'd see flashes of Caleb's bruised face, my parents being hustled into that van. And always, that sickly smooth voice in my head. One last chance. The next morning, Raj brought coffee to the window, where I'd been standing for an hour, staring down 30 floors like the city might answer me if I looked hard enough. His tie was crooked, and his eyes had the glassy sheen of too many nights without sleep. I almost smiled. "I found something," he said. I turned, and for a moment, I swear I saw the old Raj, the one who used to stash chocolate in my desk drawer when I came in after my treatments, skin pale and lips cracked, but still determined to work. He was my brother in ways Caleb never was. "What is it?" I asked. He handed me a folder. One of Tavella's shell companies didn't dot their I's. A property they use for drops. Small warehouse by the docks. Surveillance says movement there spiked right after the hotel hit. I flipped through grainy stills. A black van. License plates half obscured. A figure that could have been my mother. Shoulders hunched. Hair like salt and pepper silk. My heart rattled against my ribs so hard it felt like it might crack them open. "We go tonight," I said. Raj flinched. "Marin, you can't just walk in there. If Tavella really wants leverage, he'll expect me to crawl," I finished. "I'm not crawling." Jody stepped into the room, her boots silent as she crossed the floor. "If you're doing this, you're not going alone. I've got 2 ex-feds willing to run point, but they want hazard pay." "Done," I said. "Whatever they want." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not the only thing. They want your word that if it goes south, you walk away. They won't risk their lives for a martyr." I hesitated. The weight of it pressed down on me. Heavier than Caleb's debt. Heavier than my parents' disappointed sighs. The girl I used to be would have sacrificed herself. She'd have taken the bullet if it meant saving everyone else. But the woman standing here now knew better. The world only takes what you give it for free. "Fine," I said. "If it goes bad, we pull out." Jody nodded, the smallest flicker of relief crossing her face. "Then we'll get you in." All day, we planned. Raj's team found an old utility tunnel that hadn't been bricked up when the city modernized the waterfront. It would spit us out right under the warehouse floor. Jody's people mapped out guard rotations, shift changes, surveillance blind spots. It felt like we were orchestrating a heist, but the only thing we planned to steal was our family back. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, I changed into clothes that wouldn't draw eyes, black cargo pants, a fitted jacket, hair twisted up under a ball cap. Jody checked the clip in her sidearm twice before slipping it into her holster. The ex-feds, Bryant and Salazar, were already waiting in the SUV, tension radiating off them like heat. On the drive to the docks, the city blurred past in streaks of neon and steel. I pressed my forehead to the window, counting the seconds between my heartbeat and the rattle of the tires over potholes. If this went sideways, if Tavella called my bluff, no. I shoved the thought away. I couldn't afford fear. Not anymore. The SUV rolled to a stop behind an abandoned fish market. Jody handed out comms and did one final sweep of the perimeter. Bryant checked the drone feed, his voice low and steady. 2 guards out front, 1 on the loading dock. No sign of your people, but movement inside looks like 3 or 4 more. I forced my breathing to slow. They'll be together, I said. They want me to see them. Salazar cracked his knuckles. Then, let's not disappoint. We slipped through the tunnel like ghosts, our footsteps muffled against the damp concrete. The smell hit first. Old saltwater, mildew, something metallic that made my stomach twist. The ladder at the end of the tunnel rattled under my boots as I climbed up. Jody's hand brushed my shoulder when I hesitated at the hatch. Last chance to back out, she whispered. I shook my head. We finished this. The hatch swung open with a creak that made my pulse spike. We emerged behind a row of rusted oil drums, shadows stretching across the warehouse floor. I could see them now, my mother tied to a chair, head down, my father beside her, face bruised and pale. And behind them, the shape that had once been my brother, alive, barely. One eye swollen shut, lips cracked from dehydration. Tavella stood a few feet away, arms crossed, a smirk carved into his face like a brand. Ms. Elwood, he purred. How nice of you to join us. I stepped out from behind the barrels, hands raised just enough to show I wasn't armed, at least, not visibly. Let them go. I have the rest of your money. He laughed, a sound that skittered down my spine like cockroaches. This isn't about money anymore. This is about principle. You made me look like a fool. I took another step forward. You did that all by yourself. His smile cracked. He nodded to one of his men, a brute with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck. The man stepped forward, backhanded Caleb so hard his head snapped sideways. My mother let out a strangled sob. Stop, I shouted. Tavella, you want leverage. You want control. Fine. Take me. Let them walk. Behind me, Jody's voice hissed in my ear through the comms. Marin, don't you dare. Tavella tilted his head, studying me like a cat playing with its food. Tempting, he said. But I think I like this game better. He snapped his fingers. 2 guards hauled my parents to their feet. My father swayed, too weak to stand without the man's grip digging into his arms. Here's how this works, Tavella said. You sign over your company, every asset, every account, every dime you've hoarded like a dragon, and maybe I let them live. My hands curled into fists. I thought of that hospital room, the cold drip of chemo through my veins, the months I'd clawed my way through hell just to prove I was worth saving. I thought of the nights I'd stood over Caleb's cradle when we were kids, promising I'd always protect him, promises I'd broken when he grew up and sold me for spare parts. But this wasn't about promises anymore. You're not getting my company, I said, my voice low, razor sharp. And you're not getting my family. Tavella's smile faded. Then you're all gonna die here. Brian's voice crackled in my earpiece. 2 more moving in on your 6. Say the word. I looked at my parents, at Caleb, and then at Tavella. So sure of his power, so blind to the fire he'd just poured gasoline on. Now, I whispered. The room erupted. Jody and Salazar burst from the shadows, weapons drawn. Bryant flanked from the catwalk above, his rifle barking thunder. Chaos ripped through the warehouse. Shouts, gunfire, the crash of bodies against steel. Tavella lunged for me, but I ducked low. The training Jody drilled into me, humming in my blood. One of his men grabbed my shoulder. I spun, drove my elbow into his throat, and felt the satisfying give of cartilage under bone. The guard crumpled. I didn't look back. Through the haze of smoke and panic, I saw my parents being dragged behind cover by Salazar. Caleb crawled after them, blood smearing the floor in his wake. Tavella stumbled back, one arm clutching a bullet wound in his side. His eyes found mine, wild and disbelieving. "You stupid." I stepped forward, the pistol I'd stashed in my waistband steady in my grip. "You picked the wrong girl." I pulled the trigger. Once. Twice. Tavella dropped, his mouth open like he was trying to curse me one last time. The warehouse went quiet except for the hum of the city outside, oblivious to the war that had just ended behind its crumbling walls. Jody touched my shoulder, breathless but grinning. "You did it." I stared down at Tavella's body, the gun heavy in my hand. "No," I said. "We did." Outside, the rain was still falling, washing the blood from my boots as we led my family out into the dark. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like. How you rebuild after every bone in your body has been splintered by betrayal and stitched back together by sheer will. But I knew one thing as I looked at Caleb, broken but alive, at my parents, dazed but safe. The debt was paid. And I'd never owe another soul again. The rain didn't stop that night. It poured over the city like the sky itself was wringing out every last shred of the filth that had built up in our lives. We didn't go back to the penthouse, or the hotel. Jody led us to a safe house I didn't even know she had. An old row house near the docks, hidden behind a graffiti-tagged steel gate. Inside, it smelled of dust and old wood. But the locks were solid and the windows were boarded up tight. For the first time in days, my parents and Caleb had a roof over their heads that didn't come with a threat. I stood in the narrow hallway, my hair dripping rain onto the floorboards, listening to my father's labored breaths as he eased down onto the battered couch. My mother fussed over him, whispering prayers into his ear, her hands trembling so badly they looked like birds ready to take flight. Caleb lay in the corner, wrapped in a blanket. He didn't meet my eyes. He hadn't since we pulled him off that warehouse floor, barely conscious, his face a map of bruises and half-healed cuts. He looked so small then, like a child. But I couldn't forget how that child had grown into a man who'd signed his family away for a pipe dream. Jody hovered at my shoulder, eyes scanning every shadow. "You need to rest," she said. "I need to think," I shot back. She sighed. "You need both." But sleep still felt impossible. I made my way to the tiny kitchen, flicked on the flickering overhead light, and sat at the scarred table with a mug of black coffee. I let the warmth seep into my hands as I stared at the steam, trying to remember a time when the worst thing I had to fear was a missed deadline, or a client pitch gone wrong. In the silence, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn. I knew it was him. Caleb slid into the chair opposite mine, wincing when his ribs met the backrest. For a minute, he just looked at me, like he was searching for the girl who used to cover for him when he'd break the neighbors' windows with his baseball. "Say it," I said finally. His voice was hoarse, a raw scrape against the hush of the kitchen. "You should have let them kill me." "I don't do mercy kills," I said. "Not for family." He flinched. "Family." The word fell from his lips like a stone. "Do you really think they'll ever forgive me?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because the question felt too heavy for words. The truth was, I didn't think they would. Maybe they shouldn't. He scrubbed a hand over his face, wincing at the split skin. "I thought if I could just make it big, if I could be their golden boy forever, then you wouldn't matter anymore. You'd be free." I slammed my mug down so hard coffee sloshed over the rim. "Free? You sold me out to monsters. You watched me fight for my life while they wrote you checks you never earned. You don't get to rewrite that." His eyes glistened. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue. But the fight in him had gone somewhere I knew too well, buried deep, replaced with shame and the weight of debts he'd never repay. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For all of it." "I know," I said, softer than I meant to. "It doesn't change a damn thing." He dropped his gaze to the table. "What happens now?" "Now." The word rang in my ears like a church bell. What happens now? The threats were over, or so they seemed. Tavella's body had already made the rounds through the city's underground, a warning to anyone who thought they could squeeze the Elwoods ever again. But shadows like his didn't vanish overnight. Money still flowed through cracks we hadn't sealed. Enemies still lurked in boardrooms with suits instead of switchblades. Now, I said, we rebuild. I spent the next week in that safe house, running my company from a battered laptop, perched on the same kitchen table, where I'd ripped Caleb apart. Raj handled the board's panic. He told them half the truth and none of the rest. He called it a hostile takeover attempt, which wasn't exactly a lie. The buyout rumors faded faster than I expected. Maybe the city had always known I wasn't someone you corner. My parents spoke to me in short, clipped sentences. My mother asked if I'd come home for Sunday dinner, as if the last few weeks hadn't cracked us open like rotten fruit. I told her I'd think about it. My father never said much, but when I caught him looking at me, it was the first time I'd seen something like respect in his eyes, mixed with fear maybe, but respect all the same. As for Caleb, he drifted through the house like a ghost. Once, I found him in the backyard staring up at the rain-soaked sky, his lips moving like he was praying. For forgiveness? For a chance to rewind time? It didn't matter. I'd made peace with the fact that our story would never stitch back together the way it was. On the 8th day, Jody dropped a thumb drive on the table in front of me. Names, accounts, every shell company Tavella's people used. We can bury the rest of his network, or take it over. I stared at the drive, the weight of it heavier than any gun. Take it over, I said finally. If we don't, someone worse will. She didn't flinch. You're sure? No, I admitted. But this is our chance to rewrite the rules. We spent the next month unspooling Tavella's empire thread by rotten thread. I watched as bank accounts overseas were frozen, as dirty money was rerouted into our control. Raja's team scrubbed it clean and funneled it into legitimate investments. New jobs, community projects, scholarships, for kids who look like the old me. If I was going to live with this blood on my hands, I'd turn it into something that couldn't be bought or stolen again. The press never learned the real story. To them, I was just another CEO who'd crushed a hostile acquisition and emerged richer than before. They didn't see the nights I sat on the safe house steps, head in my hands, listening to my mother's stifled sobs behind the thin walls. Caleb left one morning before dawn. He didn't say goodbye. He left a note on the table, scrawled in shaky letters. I'm going to make things right. I almost laughed when I read it. What does right look like when the past is nothing but ashes? But I let him go. He'd never really been mine to save. 3 months later, I stood in the boardroom of my company. My company stronger than ever, its roots deeper now because they'd been watered with fire. I looked around at the people who'd stayed, who'd fought beside me when the walls closed in. Raj. Jody. The new hires who didn't know the full story but understood enough to never underestimate me. I cleared my throat. We're going to expand, I said, but not like before. We're not just consultants anymore. We're investors, builders, protectors. We take what they hoard and put it back into the hands that earned it. A ripple of surprise, then a murmur of approval, then a spark in their eyes that matched my own. After the meeting, I stood at the window, the city spread out before me like a promise and a threat all at once. The glass felt cold against my palm, but it was real. Solid. Mine. I thought about my parents, back in their house, the mortgage now owned outright by the company they'd once written me off to save. About Caleb, wherever he'd run, whatever penance he thought he owed the world. And about the girl I'd been in that hospital bed, counting pennies for pills, while my family counted dollars for dreams that weren't hers. She died a long time ago. I'd keep her ashes close, but I'd never let anyone bury me again. Outside, the sun was rising through the rain clouds, a smear of gold breaking the endless gray. I watched it, a smile curling at the edge of my mouth. I was still standing, and I was just getting started. They say that when you finally come out the other side of a storm, the world feels different. The air tastes sharper. The ground feels more solid. But no one tells you about the emptiness that comes with it, like the chaos held you together. And now that it's gone, you're just waiting for the next shoe to drop. That's how it felt in the weeks after Tavella's empire crumbled. My parents drifted back to their lives like they'd woken from a nightmare they didn't quite remember. My father took up gardening, like he could coax life back from dead soil with his bare hands. My mother busied herself with church committees, carrying casseroles to families she barely knew. Penance, maybe, for all the time she'd chosen Caleb's dreams over my survival. I visited once, standing in the doorway of my old room, its faded lavender walls and mismatched furniture frozen in time. The bed still creaked the same way when I sat down. I found an old shoebox under the mattress, photos of a girl I didn't recognize anymore. Hair thick and shiny, eyes bright, a diploma clutched in hands that still believed the world was fair. I almost left the box there, but something in me wouldn't let it go. So I took it back to my penthouse, tucked it in the back of a closet behind the suits and the files and the reminders of every war I'd fought alone. Caleb stayed gone. He called once. Burner phone, no number, voice hollow. He said he'd found a job on a fishing boat, somewhere on the Gulf. Hard work, he said. No shortcuts. I didn't ask him to come home. He didn't ask if he was welcome. We both knew better. In the office, life took on a rhythm that felt almost normal. Raj dug into the new investments with a ferocity that made the board fall in love with him all over again. Jody tripled our security contracts, hired veterans and ex-cops and ex-cons who'd rather break their own bones than betray the trust she gave them. The company's reputation changed overnight. No longer just a consultancy, but a fortress that protected its own. But under it all, I felt the pull of something I couldn't name. It was like a raw nerve, humming every time I looked at our numbers. Every time I saw how easily money twisted people into something else. Every time I woke up in a cold sweat, the ghost of Tavella's smirk behind my eyelids. One night, I couldn't sleep. The city lights outside my floor-to-ceiling windows bled into the dark like veins of neon. I made my way to the office, barefoot, hair unbound for the first time in months. The cold marble stung my feet as I stood in front of the wall where we kept the names. Clients, partners, friends. And I realized something that made my hands shake. We weren't done. Tavella was dead, but his money had roots deeper than we'd realized. Every dollar he'd laundered had touched a dozen hands before it landed in ours. And if we didn't trace every thread, some other monster would grow in his place. So I called Jody, then Raj, then the lawyer I trusted more than any sibling I'd ever had. We go deeper, I said. We find every shell, every offshore account, every name they thought they'd buried. We take it and we use it. Raj pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. Marin, you're talking about going up against an entire ecosystem. Politicians, judges, CEOs who think they're untouchable. Good, I said. Let's see how untouchable they feel when the girl they wrote off as collateral comes knocking. Jody didn't flinch. We'll need allies, people who know these shadows inside out. I nodded. Start with Tavella's enemies. He didn't build that empire without stepping on throats. Someone out there wants payback. In the weeks that followed, our offices felt less like corporate headquarters and more like a war bunker. Maps covered the walls again. Red string crisscrossed pins marking safe houses, drop points, bank branches with ties to dirty money. My days blurred into nights, strategy sessions bleeding into stakeouts, board meetings morphing into whispered conversations in parking garages at dawn. One name kept surfacing, Salvatore Sal Marchetti, an old shark in the construction rackets, rumored to have bankrolled Tavella's early days before they split over a bad real estate deal. Sal had vanished from the public eye years ago, retired, they said, or dead, but money like his never really disappears, it just changes hands. Jody's team found him in a crumbling mansion on the outskirts of the city, hiding behind iron gates and ex-mafia loyalists turned gardeners. It felt like something out of a bad movie, the kind where you knew the last scene would end with a bullet in the main character's back. I went anyway. We parked 2 blocks down. Jody and 2 of her people flanked me, hands hidden in jacket pockets, eyes scanning every window for snipers. Inside, the mansion smelled of old cigars and cheaper cologne. Sal sat by a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years, a blanket over his knees, skin pale and papery. You look just like your mother. He rasped when he saw me. His accent was thick, heavy with decades of secrets. She was a fool, but you, I hear you've got steel in your spine. She did what she thought was right, I said, though the words tasted bitter. I'm here because you have what I need. His eyes gleamed under bushy brows. Information? Protection? Or just my blessing to burn it all down? All 3, I said. He laughed, a sound that rattled in his chest like dry leaves. You think you can tear out roots this deep? Tavella was small time compared to what's left. I don't want their power, I said. I want to make sure no one ever uses it the way he did. He studied me for a long moment, then reached for the brass cane propped against his chair. There's a file, he said. My insurance policy. Names, bank routes, old blood debts they'd rather you never found. You can have it, but remember, once you open that door, you can't close it again. I know, I said. He grinned, showing a mouth of yellowed teeth. Good. Maybe you'll finish what the rest of us were too soft to do. When I left that mansion, the file felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my bag. On the drive back, Jody shot me a look that said what she didn't dare speak. Are you ready for this? I was. Ready. Terrified. Maybe both. We cracked the file open in the boardroom that night. The names read like a who's who of the city's elite. Developers, judges, lobbyists, even a senator whose campaign ran on family values, while funneling Tavella's laundered cash into offshore trusts. Raj slammed his laptop shut when he reached the end. This is suicide, Marin. So is chemo, I said. So is taking Tavella down. We didn't die then, we won't die now. A hush fell over the room. Then Jody leaned forward, elbows on her knees. All right, boss. How do we start? And just like that, the plan was set. We'd dismantle them piece by piece. Not just expose them. Rebuild every block they'd stolen from people like me. Small businesses swallowed by predatory loans. Families evicted by fake bankruptcies. Kids who never got a shot because someone siphoned their scholarships into a third yacht. We'd buy them back, bit by bit, then hand the keys over to the people who'd earned them. It wasn't vengeance. Not anymore. It was something bigger. Justice in a language people like Tavella never bothered to learn. The press called it a quiet revolution. The city's elite called it extortion, behind closed doors. But the people who mattered? The ones who got their houses back, their businesses reopened, their debts forgiven, they called it a miracle. Sometimes they'd show up at the office, hands shaking as they tried to thank me. I never knew what to say. I'd just nod and promise them one thing. No one will ever take this from you again. And every night, when I stood at that window, the city lights blinking back like a million unspoken stories, I'd think of the girl in that hospital bed, the one they left to rot while they gambled on someone else's future. She was gone. But in her place, I'd become something they couldn't break, couldn't buy, couldn't bury. I was Marin Elwood. And I'd made a promise. This city would never forget it. Some nights, I'd find myself back at that window, my reflection ghosting in the glass, the city spread out below me like a kingdom I never asked for. I'd press my palm against the cold, feel the vibrations of traffic and voices, millions of people moving through stories that would never intersect with mine. It should have felt like power. Sometimes it did, but more often it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind howling, daring me to see how far I could fall. After we cracked Sal Marchetti's file wide open, everything moved fast. Faster than I thought possible. The names in that battered folder were the same people who used to smirk when they saw my company's logo in a pitch deck, the ones who thought they'd never have to answer to someone like me. But now they couldn't ignore me. I was the ghost in their walls, the glitch in their accounts, the signature they never saw slip across the table that took what they thought was theirs and gave it back to the people they'd bled dry. We didn't make big announcements. That was the trick. A family who'd been evicted for an unpaid tax bill that never really existed? One day they'd wake up to find the keys to their house slipped through the mail slot, the mortgage voided, the lien burned. A corner shop forced out by a fake developer? We'd buy the building in a blind trust, gut the fake contracts, and hand the lease back for $1 a year. Little revolutions, one at a time. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Who was behind this? How did they do it? Some called me a vigilante in a power suit. Others said I'd lost my mind. Let them talk. The ones who mattered were the families who didn't have to choose between medicine and rent. The kids who didn't have to watch their parents cry over dinner plates scraped clean to the porcelain. But it came with a cost. One night, Raj caught up with me in the office. He'd just come from another board meeting. Half our investors were ready to call a vote to push me out. They think you're bleeding the company dry, he said, dropping into the chair across from my desk. They think this is charity. I looked up from the stack of files I'd been tearing through for hours. It's not charity. It's insurance. Marin, I've stood by you through hell and back. But you can't keep pulling money out of revenue streams to fund these rescues. Sooner or later, the math doesn't add up. Then we find a way to make it add up, I said. We take the old system apart and build something new. Raj shook his head, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Sometimes I wonder if you even remember what we were when we started. I remember, I said quietly. We were the ones everyone underestimated. We're still those people. Except now, we're the ones writing the rules. He studied me for a moment, then pushed a folder across the table. One more name, he said. The biggest one yet. I flipped it open. The photo inside was a face I'd seen on magazine covers and gala invitations, Gerard Ashcroft. Billionaire investor, city darling, the man who'd built his fortune buying up floundering startups and gutting them for parts. He'd backed Tavella once, years ago, then distanced himself when the heat got too close. Sal's file showed he'd been laundering Tavella's money through a web of real estate deals and fake charities. He was the golden goose, the kingpin. You take him down, Raj said, and the rest collapses like dominoes. I closed the folder. Then we do it. The plan took weeks to stitch together. We had to be surgical. No leaks, no mess. If Ashcroft got wind we were coming for him, he'd bury us before we reached the front door. We traced his shell companies through lawyers who claimed they didn't know where the money was going. We found hidden accounts in countries with banking laws older than my grandmother's recipes. We mapped out his deals with city officials, the donations he used as hush money. Every document felt like holding a snake by the tail. One wrong move, and it'd coil around your throat. One night I was alone in my office, the skyline flickering like a heartbeat beyond the glass, when my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me pick up. Marin Elwood, a voice rasped. We should talk. Who is this? A dry chuckle. Someone who's tired of seeing Ashcroft get away with murder. Check your inbox. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a second, the hum of the city suddenly too loud in my ears. Then I opened my laptop. One email. No subject. No body. Just an attachment. A video file. It was security camera footage, grainy but clear enough. Ashcroft in a suit worth more than my first car, slipping an envelope to a city inspector. The date stamp was 6 months ago. The same week a family-run daycare was bulldozed for code violations that never existed. I watched the clip 3 times, each loop tightening something in my chest until I could barely breathe. This was it. The nail in his coffin. I didn't sleep that night. Jody and Raj met me at dawn, bleary-eyed but ready. We released this, Raj said. And he's done. But Marin... I know, I said. He'll come for us. Jody cracked her knuckles, a grin spreading across her face. Then let him. The video hit the news cycle like a lightning bolt. By noon, Ashcroft's PR team was throwing out statements like confetti, fabricated footage, malicious attacks, baseless claims. But it didn't matter. The file was real, the proof undeniable. Families who'd lost everything to his schemes started speaking up, one by one, voices shaking but steady. I watched him on the evening news, the Golden King behind his podium, sweat shining on his temples while reporters shouted questions he couldn't answer. The backlash came fast, faster than even I expected. His investors pulled out, his charities restructured. The city council opened an ethics investigation that leaked every dirty deal he'd ever made. It should have felt like victory, but power doesn't die easy. The threats started small, veiled legal letters, anonymous calls in the dead of night. Then they escalated. One morning, I found a dead crow nailed to my front door, its feathers black as the secrets I'd unearthed. Jody doubled my security. Raj moved his family out of the city for a while. I told myself it was just desperation, the last gasp of a man who'd built his castle on lies. But fear has a way of slipping through the cracks, no matter how strong you think you are. One night, after another long strategy session, I stepped out onto the balcony for air. The city stretched below, lights blinking like a living thing. I thought of the people we'd helped, the businesses we'd saved, the families who'd never know my name but would remember what we did for them. And then I thought of Ashcroft, somewhere out there in the dark, watching, waiting. A man like him didn't vanish. He regrouped. He waited for you to blink. I heard the balcony doors slide open behind me. Jody stepped out, her arms crossed against the cold. "He's going to try something," she said. "You know that." "I know," I said. "Let him." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You're not the same girl who walked in here 5 years ago." "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not." Inside, the city pulsed and breathed and moved on. I stood there until my skin prickled with the chill, my hair whipping around my face like loose threads of a life I'd stitched back together with blood and teeth. I'd taken down Tavella. Now Ashcroft would learn the same lesson. You don't bet against the girl who's already survived being left for dead. I knew Ashcroft wouldn't go down quietly. Men like him never do. They don't fade into the shadows. They burn the house down on their way out, trying to take everyone with them. So when the threats turned from dead crows and late-night calls to a break-in at our downtown office, I wasn't surprised. They didn't steal files or smash computers. They left everything untouched, except for the smear of blood on my desk and the words scrawled across my whiteboard in thick black marker, UOUS. Raj found it before I did. He'd come in early to catch up on financials. When I walked in, his face was the color of old parchment, his eyes darting between the blood and me like he was afraid I'd disappear in front of him. "It's intimidation," he said. "You should call the police." "The police?" I almost laughed. "Ashcroft owns half the city council. They'll take my statement, file it under pending, and leak our movements to him before noon." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "So what do we do, Marin? Sit here and wait for him to show up at your door?" "No," I said. "We bring the fight to him." Jody was already 10 steps ahead of me. She'd been working her old contacts. Private security firms that didn't advertise. Investigators who'd run covert ops for governments that no longer existed. In a matter of hours, she'd pulled together a file thicker than any board report I'd ever seen. It sat on the conference table like a bomb waiting to go off. "We know where he sleeps," she said, flipping open the first page. "Where he eats, where he hides the money, the properties in Dubai, the accounts in the Caymans." "That's not enough," I said. "He'll survive a financial hit. He's survived them before. We need something that burns him to the ground." Jody's eyes flicked to Raj, then back to me. "You're talking about going public." "Not just public," I said. "Personal. He's protected because people still believe he's untouchable. They see his charities, his public statements, his parties. We rip off the mask and show them what's underneath." Raj looked sick. "You do that, he'll come for your family again." "Then let him try," I said. "I'm not the scared girl in that hospital bed anymore." That night, we called in every favor, every whisper of evidence we'd been collecting since Tavella fell. Old deals, payoffs, emails that had been wiped but never truly disappeared, a house of cards built on other people's pain. And right in the middle of it, the same signatures, the same handshake deals that once propped up my brother's doomed startup, while I begged for help paying for the poison that was supposed to save my life. I didn't sleep. None of us did. We sat in that conference room until the sky turned gray, piecing together the timeline of Ashcroft's rise like we were building our own guillotine. Every story we'd heard from families who'd lost everything. Every small business gutted for its bones. Every child's trust fund drained to prop up his next investment. It all fit together like a map of rot. Jody closed her laptop with a quiet finality. "You drop this, you don't get to put the genie back in the bottle." "Good," I said. "Let it out." We packaged everything. Digital files, sworn affidavits, signed statements from former partners who'd been too afraid to speak until now. Then we handed it to a journalist we trusted, a woman named Lila Hart, who'd built her reputation on stories that made powerful men flinch. I'll never forget the look on Lila's face when she scanned the files in my office. "They'll come for me, too," she said. "They will," I said. "But they'll come for me first. And they'll find out I'm not as easy to bury as they think." The exposé dropped on a Sunday morning. The city woke up to front-page headlines that read like a confession. Every dirty secret, every stolen life, every family who'd been a stepping stone to Ashcroft's empire. The fallout was immediate. By Monday, his board was in chaos. His investors fled like rats from a sinking ship. The charities bearing his name scrubbed his face from their websites overnight. The city council couldn't run fast enough to distance themselves. But the man himself? He went dark. No statements. No appearances. Just the rumor that he was holed up in a mansion outside the city. Lawyers swarming like flies around a carcass. I should have felt relief, vindication. But the truth was, I felt the cold weight of unfinished business pressing down on my ribs every time I tried to catch my breath. Raj knew it, too. "You think he'll come at you personally?" he asked one night as we stood by the window, watching a convoy of armored SUVs pull up to our building. Jody's new security detail. Unmarked. Armed. "He's desperate," I said. "Desperate people are dangerous." "So are you," Raj said. "Maybe that's why you're still here." A week later, I found the letter. It wasn't mailed. It was slipped under my apartment door in the middle of the night. No return address. Just my name on the envelope, written in a hand I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Marin, asterisk. You think you've won. You've only just made yourself a target. You took my empire. I'll take everything you have left. Netch G.A. I stared at those initials so long my vision blurred. Gerard Ashcroft. The king refusing to die. I thought about Caleb, somewhere far from here. Maybe on that fishing boat. Maybe in a bar halfway across the country, nursing the wounds we'd both given each other. I thought about my parents, tucked away in that old house. The mortgage paid in full by the daughter they'd once called a burden. I thought about Jody and Raj and everyone who'd stayed when it would have been easier to run. I folded the letter, slipped it into the safe in my office, alongside the hospital bracelet I'd kept all these years. A reminder of what it means to survive when you're not supposed to. The next day, I called a meeting. Our war room was back. Maps, files, names. But this time, the faces on my team weren't tight with fear. They were sharpened with purpose. "He wants to play games," I said. "Let's show him we're better at them." We started with his lawyers, chipping away at the fortress he'd built with NDAs and shell companies. One by one, they flipped, trading immunity for information. Each new leak was another crack in his armor. But still, he didn't show his face. Then the sightings started. Ashcroft in a private jet. Ashcroft in a hotel lobby overseas. Ashcroft slipping through customs under fake names. Every time we got close, he vanished again, like smoke through our fingers. The city held its breath. Some rooted for him, because monsters have fans too. But more people rooted for me. For us. Because everyone knew what it felt like to be small in a world that only respects big teeth and bigger pockets. One night, I found myself back at that window. The city spread below like a promise and a threat all at once. Jody stepped up beside me, her reflection sharp and clear in the glass. "When this is over," she said, "what then?" I didn't have an answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know what life looked like without a fight to wake up for. Maybe I'd build something better. Maybe I'd disappear. Maybe I'd stand at this window forever, waiting for the next storm to break. But when I turned to her, my voice was calm, steady. "When this is over, we make sure it never happens again." In the dark, the city breathed around us, a million lights blinking like stars that wouldn't let themselves be swallowed. Ashcroft was out there, but so was I, and he'd learn what every ghost in my past had learned before him. You don't get to bury me twice. In the weeks that followed, my life became a string of late-night meetings, encrypted phone calls, and half-slept hours on a couch that felt more like a foxhole than an office. Ashcroft was like oil on water. No matter how many cracks we forced open in his armor, he slipped through, regrouped, reinvented. But for every step he took in the dark, we matched him with two in the light. The city was waking up to him now, no longer blinded by his charities and handshake promises. Some nights, I'd catch Jody in the hall, her eyes rimmed red from reading intel reports until dawn. Raj, too. His tie always crooked these days, sleeves rolled up to the elbows like he could hold back a flood with spreadsheets alone. I loved them for that. For never asking me to slow down when they should have. For standing at my shoulder like sentries who remembered every battle scar. One morning, just before sunrise, I sat alone in the glass conference room. The city below was still, fog rolling off the river like a ghost. In my hand was the letter Ashcroft had sent. Creased now, corners soft from how many times I'd read it. "You owe us." Like I hadn't paid enough already. I thought of my parents, fragile now, the fear of the last year etched deep in the lines around their eyes. I thought of Caleb, who called every few weeks from payphones, always with the same tired promise. I'm staying clean, Mayor. I never asked him to come back. He never asked if he could. Jody's voice cut through my thoughts. There's something you need to see. I looked up. She had a tablet in her hand, the screen glowing blue in the half-light. It's him, she said. Ashcroft. A grainy image flickered on screen, security footage from a warehouse on the edge of the docks, one of the few places he still had ties. There he was. Ashcroft. Hair slicked back, face pale in the harsh light. He looked smaller than the man I remembered from the galas, the magazine covers. He looked like a cornered animal. He's moving money through the port, Jody said. Trying to get it out before the feds freeze what's left. This is our chance. I felt it then, the same cold fire that had kept me alive all these years. Call everyone, I said. We end it tonight. We moved like shadows. By sunset, the team was in place. Jody's people watching the dock entrances. Raj tracking the money trail on a laptop balanced on the hood of a van. My heartbeat felt like thunder in my chest as we slipped past rusted fences and darkened shipping containers. Every step felt like walking through my own graveyard. Tavella, the shell companies, the cancer that tried to devour me when I was too young to know how to fight back. Ashcroft was there, exactly where we expected him. A makeshift office inside an old container, light spilling out onto the dock. Two men with him, burly shadows with the dead eyes of men who'd do anything for the right price. I almost laughed. After everything, he still thought muscle would save him. Jody's voice crackled in my earpiece. You ready? Always, I whispered. We moved. Quick, clean, silent. Jody and her team swept the perimeter. One of the guards dropped before he even knew we were there. The other made the mistake of turning his back. He hit the concrete with a muffled grunt that echoed off the shipping crates. Ashcroft didn't even look up from the laptop in front of him until I stepped into the light. His eyes went wide, bloodshot and glassy, but his mouth curled into that same smirk I'd seen on 1,000 magazine covers. Marin Elwood, he drawled. I was wondering when you'd crawl out of your little fortress. I didn't answer, just looked at him. This man who'd stolen years of my life without ever laying a hand on me. This man who'd bet my life against my brother's dreams and never thought he'd lose. He leaned back in the metal chair, trying to look at ease. You think you've won, don't you? You think you're some kind of hero. But you're just a girl playing dress-up with monsters. I stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel. You're right, I was. But the thing about monsters, Gerard? They forget some girls grow teeth. His smirk twitched, something flickering behind his eyes. Fear. He tried to hide it with a laugh. You gonna shoot me? In front of all these witnesses? I leaned over the table, my hands braced on the rusted metal. No, I said. I'm gonna do what you never expected. I'm gonna let you live. His smile faltered. What? I'm gonna leave you here, I said. I'm gonna make sure every penny you ever touched is traced and frozen. I'm gonna make sure the people you buried have your face on every headline until you can't buy a meal in this city without someone spitting in it. Ashcroft's face blanched. You can't. I can, I said, and I will. You don't get the mercy of dying a martyr, Gerard. You get to watch everything you built rot from the inside out. Behind me, Jody stood at my shoulder, arms crossed. Raj hovered at the container door, phone in hand, streaming every word to the authorities, the press, the families who deserved to see the monster in daylight. Ashcroft lurched to his feet, rage twisting his features into something almost unrecognizable. I'll rebuild, he hissed. You think you're special? You're just another liar who thinks she's better than the people she crawled out from under. I felt a laugh bubble up, cold and final. You're right. I'm not better. I'm worse. Because I don't just survive, Gerard. I make sure they remember I was here. In the distance, sirens wailed, echoing off the water, red and blue lights bouncing off steel and salt, and the ghosts of every lie he'd ever told. Ashcroft spun, searching for an exit, but there was none. Jody's team had the dock sealed tight. Raj stepped forward, voice calm and clear. It's over. Ashcroft met my eyes one last time. For a heartbeat, I almost saw the man who'd once poured money into my brother's startup like it was nothing. Just a gamble, just a girl's life as collateral. Then the mask cracked and he was just a scared old man in an empty shipping yard. When the police hauled him out, wrists cuffed tight, he didn't look at me. He didn't have to. I'd already taken everything that mattered. Hours later, I stood at the edge of the docks, the city lights flickering on the black water. Jody leaned against the railing beside me, the salt wind tangling her hair. "It's done," she said. "For now," I said. "Men like him. They always grow back." She shrugged. "Then we'll be here to pull them up by the roots again." I thought of my parents, safe in that house I'd once thought would always belong to someone else. I thought of Caleb, adrift but alive. I thought of the girl I'd been when they chose a startup pitch over my medical bills. That girl would have cried tonight. But me? I just breathed in the wind, the salt, the city's heartbeat thrumming under my boots. "Let them come," I said. "This time, they know my name." Beside me, Jody's laugh danced on the dark waves. Tomorrow, there'd be headlines. Investigations. Smiling faces pretending they'd never heard of Gerard Ashcroft. But tonight was ours. And I was still here, still standing, still unbreakable. When the city woke the next morning, Ashcroft's face was everywhere. Headlines called it the fall of an empire, but I knew better. Empires don't fall all at once. They crumble, brick by brick, under the weight of their own lies. And sometimes it takes one person, one girl they thought they could write off, to pull out the first stone. I watched the coverage from my office, the skyline bleeding sunrise through the glass. My team gathered around the big screen, eyes red from exhaustion, but smiles tugging at the corners of their mouths. Jody had a fresh bruise on her cheek from the docks, a souvenir she wore like a badge. Raj leaned against the conference table, suit rumpled, coffee mug in his hands like it was the only thing holding him up. Ashcroft's mugshot filled the screen. His eyes were bloodshot, hair mussed like the storm had finally caught him. Charges scrolled across the ticker: fraud, extortion, conspiracy. They'd add more before the day was out. I wondered if he'd sit in that cell and think about me, about the girl he'd bet my family's future against, about the daughter my parents chose to discard for my brother's shot at greatness. Maybe he'd wonder if it was worth it. It wasn't my problem anymore. The company was mine now, truly mine. No shadows lurking in the accounts, no debts waiting to drag us under. We'd carved out the rot, fumigated every last corner that still smelled like Tavella and Ashcroft, and the men who'd thought power was a shield big enough to hide behind forever. That afternoon, we held a meeting in the same glass conference room where I'd first read the doctor's diagnosis all those years ago. I could still picture the version of me who'd sat here, phone pressed to her ear, waiting for her parents to say, "Come home, we'll take care of you." But they didn't. And maybe that was the gift, the lesson carved into bone that no one would ever save me but me. "So," Raj said, pulling me back to the room, "what happens now?" I looked around at the faces of the people who'd stood by me through every storm. Jody, bruised but grinning. Raj, steady as a heartbeat. The new hires who'd only known the version of me that didn't flinch when the world turned sharp. "Now," I said, "we keep our promise." Jody raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" I smiled. "The only one that matters. We protect what they tried to take from us. The people, the families, the kids who think they're alone." Raj's smile was tired but real. "And if the next Ashcroft shows up?" I leaned back, letting the sun warm my face through the glass. "Then we remind him, this city remembers my name." It took months to untangle the final threads. Every account frozen, every shell company dissolved, every contract Ashcroft had forged under someone else's name dragged into the light. Lawyers tried to bury us in paperwork. PR firms begged us to move on. But I didn't. I wouldn't. We were building something that couldn't be torn down with hush money and half-truths. In the evenings, I'd visit my parents. My father looked older now, but lighter too, like a man who'd finally stopped believing the myth that your kids have to save you. My mother fussed over me like she was trying to fix all the years we'd lost. She never apologized. Not really. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, she'd brush my hair behind my ear the same way she did when I was little, and I'd let her. It was enough. Caleb stayed gone mostly. He called from time to time, voice clearer than it used to be. "I'm sober," he'd say. "I'm working on a boat off the coast, long hours, good people." He never asked for money. Never asked for more. Maybe that was his penance. Maybe that was his way of loving me in the only language he still knew. One night, I stood outside the house I grew up in. The porch light flickered like it always had. I thought of all the nights I'd pressed my forehead to that front door, waiting for someone to let me in. Now it was mine, not because they gave it to me, but because I'd taken back every brick, every beam, every piece of myself they'd gambled away. I let myself stand there for a while, breathing in the scent of cut grass and old trees. Then I turned away. My home wasn't here anymore. It was the people who'd stayed when they could have run. It was the team waiting for me in the glass tower. It was the city that would never forget my name. When I walked back into the office the next morning, I found Jody waiting at my door. She looked different, lighter, but sharper too. She handed me a thin folder. "What's this?" I asked. "A new project," she said. "Someone's trying to pull the same tricks Tavea did. Fake loans, dirty contracts, laundering through old charities." I raised an eyebrow. "And you want me to?" She grinned. "You think I'm letting you retire? We built this company to hunt shadows. You promised we'd keep going." I laughed. Really laughed for the first time in months. "All right. One more hunt." Raj poked his head in, his laptop balanced on one palm. "You'll want to see the numbers. Investors are calling. They want to double down." I shook my head. "They'll wait. People come first. Always." As the day bled into night, the office hummed like a heartbeat. Phones rang. Screens glowed. Names and deals flickered across whiteboards, like constellations only we could see. And in the middle of it all, I stood at the window, looking out at a city that no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like mine. I thought of every version of myself I'd been. The sick girl with the IV drip and the cracked lips. The woman scraping together rent for treatment she couldn't afford. The sister no one believed in. The daughter left behind. She was gone now. In her place was Marin Elwood, CEO, guardian, hunter of monsters who thought no one would ever stand up to them. Behind me, I heard Jody laughing with Raj. I turned and saw them. My real family, the one I'd built from grit and second chances. They didn't need me to be perfect. They needed me to be exactly who I was. The rain started as I turned back to the glass, city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of gold and blue. Somewhere out there, another Ashcroft was waiting, watching, thinking they'd be the one to bring me down. Let them try. I'd survived worse. And this time, the whole world knew exactly who they were dealing with. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.